All right. Morning, everyone. My name is James Gardner. I'm the Director of Data Analytics and Insight at Parkdean Resorts. I joined Parkdean Resorts about 3 years ago to help them get more value from their data. By way of background, it's a mix of consulting and industry where I've put together analytics strategies, roadmaps, delivered elements of those roadmaps by way of projects or program delivery, POCs, right the way through to building the teams that deliver that capability. So today, the way I've approached this is to think about my experience of sitting in the audience. And often when I've gone to conferences and events, there are probably 3 or 4 nuggets that I take away from any presentation that think that was a genuinely useful spend of my time. So I've tried to build this presentation around giving you the 4 key nuggets, or the 4 things that I'd tell my younger self if I could travel back in time. But what I will do before we get into that is I'll give you a brief background of Parkdean Resorts, our journey so far, and I'll try and answer the exam question of how we actually use data to drive shareholder value in a very concrete way. So has anyone been to Parkdean Resorts? Fantastic, some of you. Yes, you're within the 3.5 million people that holiday with us each year. So just to put it in perspective, we have 66 coastal and rural locations. These are holiday parks with a mix of owners, so units that we sell, plus units that are leased out for people to come on holiday. We essentially sell bucket and spade holidays for families and kids, beer and burgers, bingo, that sort of thing. We're based up in Newcastle. Anyone from Newcastle? Yes, friendliest city on the planet. In terms of our estate, it's about 3,500 acres, 21,000 owners across our parks, and perhaps our most impressive accolade, we hold the Guinness World Record for most number of people doing baby shark. You know, when you start a job, you walk into reception and you see a Guinness World Record thing that says most number of people doing baby shark, you think, shit, I'm in the right place. So just to share a bit about our journey. So up until about 4 or 5 years ago, Parkdean really existed as 66 separate businesses, all run in their own ways, using their own systems, where the general managers were, if you like, king of the castle. And it's gone through a significant transformation to become a centrally run business with a central support function, where we've gone through massive technology change. So big system implementations, Salesforce, Dayforce, a whole bunch of other ones around our P2P systems. So there's been a lot of change and a lot of centralization and a big move to standardize our working practice. So against that, if we dial back 3 years ago, we kicked off what's known as DA&I, so Data Analytics and Insight. And the mandate really was to help Parkdean get more value from its data. But value is quite a loose concept, right? It's never really, well, it's very rarely made concrete. But before I get into that, I'll just talk through technology stacks. So these are our toys. When I first joined, we just had SQL Server and Excel, secretly. A little bit of love for Excel still. Microsoft Azure, that's our cloud container. Snowflake, that's our database application, scalable database application, in which we hold our organizational data by way of a data lake, as well as data marts, where it's consumed. Matillion, that moves data from the foundation layer through to presentation or analytical layer. It's our ETL choice, or ELT. Is that right? Yeah, I've got some of my technical authorities with me to keep you straight here. And then HVR. So the role HVR plays is that enables us to do that kind of intraday robust replication from our on-premise systems. Particularly useful because it provides change data capture capability. Essential if you've got fast-moving data like bookings. Data IQ, our end-to-end data science platform, that allows us to build up, if you like, libraries of our code, modular libraries of our code, manage releases, as well as industrialize some of our models. So that's what the guys in data science use. And then SQL, that's our SQL Server. It still runs a lot of our legacy reporting. It's soon to be decommissioned. And then Power BI, that's about our dashboards, both for mobile-friendly devices as well as laptops. And we're also getting into Power Apps at the moment to really kind of, I suppose, pulse out some of the key information our operators need to act on. So the question, how do we use it to drive improved decision-making and deliver increased shareholder value? Well, the first part of that, the improved decision-making, is pretty straightforward, right? You give someone a dashboard, they can, hopefully, if they know what to do with it, and they're data literate, they can actually use it. But the shareholder value is a real difficult one. So if we start at the beginning, right? The dialogue, and I'll come back to the narrative, and I go on about the narrative when I talk with my team. We are accountable for an investment. DA and I won't give you specifics, but it costs X million pound a year to run. At the end of the day, I have to stand up in front of the exec, as the exec will have to stand up in front of the shareholders and say, you spent X million quid on that team, what did it return? What's the ROI? And that's the harsh question that we've got to answer. Now, granted, not everything you do in the I suppose, technology space has a clear measurable ROI, but some of it does. So starting with what's that story going to look like, and then developing a commercial mindset within your team. So I mean, how many of us have had someone come to them and say, can you help me develop this report? I know it's going to take you 3 months, but it'll save me half a day a month. And you think, why would I bother? I'm not in the business of saving you half a day a month, right? Business outcomes. Someone comes to us and they say, I want this chart, I want this dashboard, I want this report. Is your team clear on the actual business outcome? Right? If you keep asking, so what? So what? I build you this report, so what? What are you going to do with it? Well, I'm going to enjoy it. Well, that's not good enough. Oh, it helps me. Okay, how does it help you? Does it help you sleep at night? Right? Or is it a bit more substantial? So you start by driving a commercial mindset, getting people to think about, right, what's the measurable commercial outcome? How is this going to move the needle, right? And quite early on, we switched the narrative to say, our team is a center of value creation. We're not a cost code, right? We're not a cost center, I should say. We are there to generate enterprise value. We are held accountable for that. So you, Mr. Customer, and that will be an internal customer, tell us how what you're asking us to do is going to get us there, right? Data-driven products, obviously, starts with dashboards. It could be algorithms, it could be reports, a point at which the insight is consumed. And then getting really clear on, for example, are people using it? If so, what are they using? And not being afraid to sit there and walk through the conversation with the user, the frustrations, and sit next to them. And then make sure we really measure that commercial impact. And that's easy to say. What do we mean by measure a commercial impact? Do they use it? Is that a commercial impact? Well, not really. It's if you generate an improved outcome for the business, that is when you get value from it. Otherwise, everything you've done before hasn't really been capitalized. So I'm going to go into the 4 concepts, particularly about start with value. And I want to give you a framework. So when we talk about value, we talk about 4 types of value. Operational efficiencies, direct cost savings, increasing revenues and profitability, and direct data monetization. It's also helpful. I'll run you through the definitions and I'll give some examples. But internally, we have a list of projects. We have a pipeline. And for each project, we qualify the type of value it generates within the organization. And when we do a project, we write a case study up. Now, these are a really good discipline to get into, because when someone says, what does your team do? What does it bring? You go, well, here's our pipeline. There's the types of value. There's some numbers in boxes that have been signed off by finance. And here's a wad of case studies. Thanks very much. Call me if you've got any questions. So, operational efficiencies. We get hung up here as data professionals about reducing cost of insight. We've all produced a report. It saves people a few hours, a few weeks, a month. But no one really gets sacked, right? You never realize that cost saving. They go and do more value-add activities. So that makes it quite difficult to say, I've reduced cost, right? And we don't tend to measure what we do at that end of the spectrum, right? So we'll talk about direct cost savings now. So you're moving up. This is where you identify cost reduction opportunities in the business. This is not shred count. This is not going around saying, we can do that and fire people, right? It's about saying, could we do, for example, meaningful comparisons between our parks on certain cost metrics to see where are they overspending, where are they underspending? Can we partner with procurement to look at our accounts payable data to spot opportunities to reduce cost and negotiate smarter? And that's what we did. Increasing revenues and profitability. This could be around developing a single view of customer that allows you to better segment your customer base, send out more tailored marketing messaging. And again, that's measurable. Direct data monetization. You've got a data asset. The question is, what can you do with it? Can you potentially sell it? Right, through, shout out to Snowflake. Is Snowflake here? That's a shame. They're probably busy selling. They have a marketplace where we're soon to start offering up our data for our suppliers to be able to better manage their supply chains and meet demand. So there's a whole host of applications. I'd encourage you to think about these types and talk about them with your commercial stakeholders, or your customers as we call them. Because it drives a different thinking. It moves you away from the report that you want, or the dashboard, or whatever it is, the point of consumption. And it moves you towards thinking about organizational value, right? Second thing, capability versus credibility. Who here hates quick wins? Yeah, me too. Yeah, egg at the front, thank you. What I've done here is to kind of illustrate a key point here around what business stakeholders see as value, which is above the line, and what they won't understand, which is below the line, right? And we all know the hard yards are below the line. Not to take it away from anyone that builds Power BI dashboards or works in UX, but the really grotty work is below the line. And you can't keep churning out dashboards, doing UX, engaging with the business and communicating about your latest wins and what you've done for the contact center or operating on Park, unless you build an underlying capability that's going to make sure next year, the year after, you can keep doing that. So make that part of your narrative. You have to explain, yeah, we can do things. And when you lay out your roadmap, yes, lay out quick wins, but use that to buy yourself time to build that fundamental capability, right? Data quality, the least sexy subject, data management, but you need it. Ultimately, your stakeholders will turn around and say, well, I can't trust this report. It's no good to me. I'll go back to, the clipboard or whatever it was they're using before. That's a fundamental point that you've got to get across, right, is how ultimately these things connect. So we are responsible for educating in the business domain, right? But really think practically and understand, and it's not personal, understand that the things above the line are what people see, right? What commercial stakeholders see, what they see value in. We've all had that feedback of, now I understand what you do, you should tell more people about it. You should be more vocal, right? Neglecting comms, we all do it. It's the last thing we want to do. We hate it, but really, really important to do, because that's where the business see value, and that's sponsorship, right? Third thing, some brutal truths, right? As technologists, we credentialize ourselves, I don't even know if that's a word, by talking about what we know, about our products, about our depth of our technical knowledge. As soon as we step into a commercial sphere or arena, that is not how we are credentialized, right? That does not do anything other than put people to sleep, right? What credentializes us is understanding the business, right? Is being able to say, I understand your pain, right? Leading with a knowledge about what you can solve for them. So the key point, if they can solve a problem for me, I'm all ears, right? It's the basis of selling, right? We're in the business of selling, like it or not, but you've got to think about what decisions do they need to make? What problems can I solve for them, right? And be really clear. They don't care. I've tried to be as polite as I can. They don't care about how you solve the problem. They care about when, how much, and what do you need from me, right? It's a shorter conversation. And I'm going to fall asleep soon, right? In technology, we have a different attention span to the business. That's a fact, right? We have to accept, get your point across very, very succinctly. And if they have more questions, they will ask. But just focus on, I know you have a problem. This is how I can solve it. This is what I need from you. This is what it's going to cost. This is when it will turn up. Does that work? Do I have your backing, right? It's very different. Concept 4, be deliberate about your team culture. So to give you a bit of context, having worked in a range of toxic environments and weird and wonderful firms over the years, I wanted to make sure that when we stood up a team, and our team grew quickly, it grew from 7 to 40-something people in an 18-month period during lockdown, so massive growth in a remote working or hybrid environment. So we had to be very deliberate about what's that team culture, how do we establish that? So we got together and we said, right, what are our rules? What's our team charter that we're going to live by? And we came up with this. And I'll run you through a few of them, but just to give you an idea, we wrote it, I emailed it to the whole team, I copied in my boss, just to let them know I was serious. And I even updated some of the team's job descriptions to challenge me to make sure I was held accountable. So if ever they found themselves in HR because they told me I was being a bit of a dick, they could pull this out, pull out that email and say, well, you told me to, right? So you've got to be an example of this, right? It's not just team do this, I'm doing something else. So I'll run you through a few of these. And bear in mind, all of these tie together to have a compound effect. First one is no surprises, right? If when your team come to you, they tell you we've got a problem, it's really messy, I don't know how to solve it, and you get upset with them, they're not going to come to you again. If they do, it will be when it's much, much later in the process, right? So you need to encourage people to come to you and say, okay, great, things happen, this is about how we deal with it, not scream at them. Everyone paddles, right? And this is not really about the team. This is about our customers, right? If we are doing something for the business, they have to contribute. They have to pony up, right? We're not going to sit there, do all the work while they drink beer in a deck chair. That's not how this game works. Ask for forgiveness, not permission. Very key. I think that kind of explains itself. Focus on reducing your risk. I'll just skip through, just aware of time. Risk isn't about, people don't understand risk, delivery risk. They think, oh, I've done my job, that's great. Well, it didn't work out, but I did my job. No, we're all on the hook for the team outcomes. We need to be thinking about more than just our scope, right, and working together. If you think, oh, I'm pretty sure they're going to drop the ball over there on that thing, right, put your hand up. What can you do, right? We're collectively responsible. Mistakes are a necessary education, right? And we're going to share the slides afterwards, so. The key thing here is driving innovation, right? If your team aren't making mistakes, they're not trying hard enough, or they fear making a mistake is going to get them in the doghouse, right? You've got to really, you learn when you make mistakes. When you get it right, you've just proven something, yeah? If you think about no surprises, mistakes are a necessary education, utterly key to an innovation strategy. And then the last bit, how we do what we do is more important, or as important as what we deliver, right? People always forget what you say. They never forget how you make them feel. So in conclusion, right, before we stop for some Q&A, thinking like a shareholder, I'm thinking about it literally as an investor, aligns you to the thinking you're going to see within your senior exec, right, and your directorate. If you can't quite get there, keep asking, so what? So what? So what? You know, on a dashboard, so what? What are you going to do with it? Until you are clear and your team is clear on what the outcomes are. Think about the narrative, right? The choices you make with the work that you take on, how you deliver it, and what you do as a team all come together as a story, right? And there's a story that's told either at quarterly reviews or year end where you have to account for the choices you make, the work that you take on. And if it's not a compelling narrative, if you can't defend that, a bit like when you put your expenses through, yeah? And you've got that receipt for 40 Jaeger bombs at 2 a.m. in Cozy Joe's in Newcastle, and you're thinking, yeah, it was good, but what's the narrative? How do I explain that to my boss and HR? And that's a real example. No, that's something to bear in mind. Whatever you do, you've got to kind of think, how's this going to look against, for people who are assessing what we do, the value we generate against the framework, against those principles. Point 4, solutions sell to the business, not technology, right? It's the application that matters. It's the pain that you take away from the business, the things that you solve that win you friends in a business sphere. And we have to accept that. As excited as we get about technology and the capability and all the cool things it does, that's really for us. That's our enjoyment, right? And then the last point is be proactive about your culture, right, that you set. This is really key. And it's really difficult. It's a very difficult one, particularly in a kind of hybrid working space. How do you get that sense of culture, that sense of identity, and even in some cases move away from toxic cultural behaviors that have previously existed? So I think that's it. I think we're good for Q&A. I'll leave it on that slide. Someone with a mic. Great.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I heard speaking about data management and data quality. Did you have some issues? How did you resolve them? What were some measures you made?
Right. Good question. I wish I'd have fed it to you beforehand. Data management, data quality. So we went through a big effort to put in data governance in Parkdean, right? And it was a struggle. It's very dry. It's very academic. And the business kind of didn't get it. You know, these are guys who work on holiday parks and sell beers and burgers. And when you go with quite a dry data management framework or data governance framework, they just don't get it. We flipped it around and went quite practically with problems. So we said, right, we've got a problem, right? We can't properly, over in accounting, we can't properly reconcile holiday sales revenue because this thing over here in the contact center isn't right. You know, it's a business process issue, right? There's a problem there that's causing that. So we were very practical about trying to connect end to end and get people to say, we have a problem, right? Crystallize them around doing something and working together. And what we found is, yes, data is always an issue. As soon as you put dashboards out there, people go, well, the number's not right. You're like, well, it's never been right. Right? Now, how do we get it right? And what we have found now, having replaced 90% of the organizational reporting, we've stood up our warehouse, we've loaded our organizational data in, is we are now spending our time looking at business process around our enterprise systems, user process around data entry, as well as configuration to lock down those business processes so we get less variation in the data model flowing through. Right? And I think that's a difficult thing, particularly if you're in a kind of data analytics space from a reporting perspective. Ultimately, you're only as good as your data, right? So we found ourselves moving into that space and pivoting the team to really work cross-functionally on business process mapping. Does that answer your question? Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Very insightful. You mentioned about tracking the value of that your data function is creating. Do you have any ways for doing that for specific teams or members of the data function? For example, like tracking an analyst's individual value created.
We've been quite deliberate about not getting down to individual team members, right? I mean, and the reasoning for that is we all work as a whole, right? And there are people that have jobs in data engineering through to building dashboards to data scientists to you name it. As soon as you get to the point of saying that person creates that value, you open yourself up to a whole different risk, where one of the exec will say, well, if they're making all the value, we can lose those people. So I've been very deliberate about saying, look, all of these people are needed to make it work. You know, the people who you think are the all-stars stand on the shoulders of our engineers, right? And been very, very deliberate about that messaging. So we tag value to outcome generated or project, if that helps.
Thanks very much for the talk.
Cool.
You mentioned about saying no when there's not the value coming out of the request.
Yeah.
Did you have to go through a transition to build that culture? I found no isn't really an option. Later, but not no.
I suppose a lot depends on where you sit within the organization and who you work for. So, like my boss is the CFO, Ian Kellett, by the way, if he's watching. And he's very specific around, you know, tangible value creation, right? So when we have a conversation with someone who's asking for something, we say, look, as a team, we are evaluated in this way. We have to account for the spend, and we have to evidence against the framework the value we're creating. So you're asking me to do this thing over here that's going to take half my team 3 months, and there's nothing really I can show for it. I mean, maybe it's one of those things that, you know, yeah, you need to do, because there are always those things where there's no direct value creation, but it makes sense and it's the right thing to do. You've either got to push back and say, well, look, it doesn't sit against my metrics, or get a pass and say, look, we're going to do this thing. It's not going to create any measurable value, but it's the right thing to do. Oh, last question, I think. Hey.
Hi, yeah, thanks. You talked about how you sell this to your executive. How have you gone about selling it to your customer, and what improvements have they seen in their customer experience?
So when you say customer, just before you get rid of the mic,
Yeah.
do you mean internal customer, or do you mean the people that come on park?
External, the people who come to your park.
Right. Okay, so I suppose if we think about the customer experience, ultimately we've not had to sell the function, because it's, I suppose, an enterprise-wide function that operates internally, externally, if that makes sense. The wins for our customers are when we can start to do things in a better way, right? And it could be we're better able to respond to complaints, right? It could be we're better able to maintain our caravans. So when you stay in a lodge or caravan, you know, the cupboards aren't falling off, right? It could be we're able to communicate messages that are more relevant rather than spamming them with emails. So I think it's not so much I wouldn't say it's necessarily a sell to a customer, but they will notice over time gradually by an improved experience, a more frictionless experience on park. So does that answer your...
I'm just thinking in terms of your data governance and telling your customers about what you're going to be using their data for. You would have had some communication with them, and now
Yeah.
we can see the fruits of that authority.
Yeah, I mean, the way in which we've communicated intent is typically through privacy notices, terms and conditions on website, where we've sort of said, you know, we're going to use data for analytical purposes, which is within legitimate interest. And I think we've just had to be really, really strict with ourselves internally on the use of that data and how we deploy it. Cool. Thanks very much. All right.